This presentation is titled The Road to Learn About GMOs. In this presentation, you will learn what a GMO is, how they are made, what the consequences are, and if you can avoid them. First, what is a GMO? GMO stands for genetically modified organism. A better term to use is genetically engineered because organisms have been modified throughout all of time. An organism is any living system, but most of the examples used in this presentation are plants as they're less complex and easier to understand than animals. The term GMO is used for transgenic organisms, which are organisms that contain foreign DNA. Transgenesis is one way of changing an organism, but plants have always been naturally changing through the process of natural selection, artificial selection, and mutations. First, natural selection. As Dr. Jacobs informed us about, natural selection is a process in which evolution occurs. The best adapted organisms survive and pass their genes on to the next generation. One example of this is a thistle. Thistles that are pricklier are less likely to be eaten, therefore the next generation of plants in that area would be pricklier. As you would be able to tell, natural selection is a slow process, and it doesn't always turn out in human favors, aka prickly plants. Using the previous example, farmers don't want prickly plants on their fields, so they would begin the process of artificial selection by killing off the prickly thistle. Therefore, the next generation would be less prickly because the prickly ones would have been killed off. Artificial selection is when an organism changes due to human decision. Even the first farmers learned the advantages of artificial selection. Thousands of years ago, people moved around to different locations to gather and then settled to grow their crops. At the end of the harvesting season, they learned to save the seeds of the plants that produced the best crops. Eventually, their field was full of better harvest and evolution occurred. Finally, mutations. Mutations are just a change in an organism that happened really drastically, or there was a drastic change between the parent compared to the offspring. Most of the time, they do not survive, and occasionally they can greatly benefit the farmer or the organism. In this case, the thistle in the bottom right corner, this is a mutated thistle that just grew crazy. These two types of selection will always cause evolution to occur, and they'll always happen naturally. But now people have decided artificial selection isn't fast enough, and with today's technology, it'd be better to engineer DNA of an organism to obtain the desired characteristic. Selective breeding is in between the severity of artificial selection and genetically changing an organism's DNA. Selective breeding is when humans choose individual plants with the desired characteristics and interbreed them to hopefully produce an offspring with those desired characteristics. This isn't as natural as artificial selection because you're forcing two organisms to breed that wouldn't naturally. For example, the wild mustard plant in this picture was bred with broccoli to modify the flower buds and the stem on the broccoli. But this process isn't the exact same as genetic engineering either, because humans can't force two species to interbreed that won't. For example, you can't force a cow and a canola to interbreed, but you can move the DNA from a cow into a piece of canola. As I said before, transgenics are plants that contain foreign DNA. The offspring of natural selection, artificial selection, or selective breeding wouldn't be classified as transgenic organisms because their DNA hasn't been engineered and received its DNA from its parents. Transgenics are organisms that have been given new abilities. For example, they can make a new protein or enzyme, or even produce different substances. In this picture, this piece of corn has become colorful. It's probably a photoshopped picture, but it proves a point. And then in this picture is tomatoes that have been engineered to have a longer shelf life. In 1994, a tomato that did just that became the first GMO in the United States legalized for human consumption. It was later taken off shelves for no real reason. Next, how GMOs are made. GMOs are made using guns and scissors. These aren't the only two ways to make them, but they're the most common ways. Most GMOs aren't obviously like the flavor saver and just sitting on your shelf saying, I'm a GMO. Most of them are hidden in our processed foods and used as feed corn, and they don't have really different, crazy, awesome features. They're just, most of them just have a built-in pesticide called Roundup. To make a GMO, first you have to find the desired gene in another organism and extract it. To do this, you need to use scissors to extract the DNA. Okay, so they're not actually scissors, but they're just enzymes that do exactly what scissors do. They specifically cut certain parts of the DNA. When it is extracted, they then transfer this certain gene into a plasmid. Plasmids are circular DNA in soil-dwelling bacterium called agrobacterium, and they look kind of like this. A plasmid is used because a plasmid has the ability to move outside the bacterium and implant itself in the plant cell, exactly what they want it to do. Plasmids are just the carrier for the important transgene, and then they implant it into the crop. Gene guns are another way to get the transgene into a plant cell. Okay, so maybe it doesn't look like that, but it looks something like this. First, they take the genes cut by the enzymes, and then they use high-pressured helium to blast it into the plant cell. DNA is covered in gold, and then the gold dissolves once the transgene is in the nucleus. So this is what the process looks like. The gene can then be bred into offspring plants, and if the gene was successfully taken up by the chromosome in the nucleus of the plant cells, everything will go smoothly. The last step is called back-cross breeding. This is actually just when you just breed the plants over and over and over with the ones of the same species until you get the desired plant that you want, and so the gene is spread throughout all of the species. Are there any consequences? To be honest, we don't really know because GMOs haven't been researched and there's not really any reliable research to prove any health concerns attached to GMOs, which there probably are, we just don't know about them yet. There is some research for both sides, the pro-GMO and no-GMO sides, but they always contradict each other. Some say there's good evidence, and then some say there's bad. Some advantages to GMOs over selective breeding include it's cheaper because you don't have to buy as many pesticides, it's faster, it's done with more precision, and there's a broader range of possibilities. Genetic pollution is one consequence that we know of. This happens when a type of GM crop becomes common and it's planted outside, no longer in the lab. With this GMO in nature, it will be able to cross with any other wild plant, which could easily produce offspring with some of the GMO's DNA. This could also happen with weeds. For example, if there's weeds growing close to the GM crop with an herbicide resistance, they could interbreed and then create superweeds. GM canola has already escaped, and there are 24 known types of superweeds. One way to stop genetic pollution is to create GM crops that have been modified so they can't germinate. This is done with a technology called gene protector, or GP for short. With this technology, if two plants did successfully cross-pollinate, any seeds produced wouldn't be able to germinate. One conflict with this is that many farmers save the seeds for next year's crops, but if they're using GP seeds, every single year they'd have to buy new seeds because their seeds wouldn't germinate. Many say that seeds made with the GP aren't much different than hybrid seeds, which are created through selective breeding. They argue that because the seeds that are produced from hybrid plants don't usually grow as well as their parents, and then farmers end up buying new hybrid seeds every year anyway. So that's a big controversy too, is what's the difference between GMO and hybrid, or transgenetics versus selective breeding. Next is pesticide resistance. This is another conflict because many pests are already immune to different types of pesticides and herbicides. Building them into the plants won't make them unimmunized. They're still going to be immunized to it, or immune to it, and the pests could also become immune to these GMO crops. Putting the pesticides into the crops will give the pest longer exposure, which will help their body be able to actually become fasterly immune to it. One example of this is BT corn. BT corn is a type of GM crop that produces protein crystals that are toxic to many insects. This pesticide attacks the intestines and causes slow death to any insects that come in contact with it. One of the problems with this is that the slow death gives time for other important bugs like ladybugs and monarch butterflies to come and eat the dying insect and then die as well. This has caused many deaths in these beneficial bugs. This is only one of the cons of BT corn, and BT cotton also exists. Now there's one big, huge controversy about vegetarians. Because GM foods has caused an uprising with them, scientists have begun experimenting with animal genes in vegetables. So then vegetarians are very concerned that their vegetables might actually contain meat. And the last consequence that is very obvious is we could run out of organic. With GMOs becoming more common, it's almost impossible to go back to organic. GMOs in the wild could easily contaminate any organic plants going and make them unorganic. Okay, so we've heard all of this bad stuff about GMOs. Now, how it must be so easy to avoid them, right? Wrong. It's actually very hard to avoid them, as labeling GMOs is not a mandatory law. One thing you can do is watch more presentations like this and become aware of where GMOs may be present. You could also become even more familiar by reading online, because corn and soybeans are the usually GM crops, and as we learned before, tomatoes have been tested on. The word organic is a really controversial topic in Canada and isn't properly understood. The Canadian government writes that the organic logo is only permitted on products that have organic content that is greater than 95% and has been certified according to the Canadian requirements for organic products. But where it gets confusing is how things get certified. So this is directly from the Government of Canada website. The top blurb just at the top, in summary, really it's just saying that anything can be organic if you're growing it to nurture the ecosystem in order to achieve sustainable productivity, and if you provide weed, pest, and disease control through enhancement of biodiversity. You also have to recycle everything properly and use recycling to your advantage. But that isn't really a strong statement, nor is it strongly enforced. One way to get past this is just using pesticides the first year, and then the next year going to organic fertilizer, but the toxic chemicals of last year's pesticides would still be in the soil, but you could still label your product as organic. The question at the bottom here is also from the Government of Canada website. It's just saying that, yes, they do test if things are organic or non-organic, but it doesn't say how they test for them. To test everything properly, every piece of produce's DNA would need to be tested for GMOs and then compared with a regular piece of DNA from the same species if they wanted to be 100% organic. But 100% organic doesn't even exist in Canada. Organic crops can still interbreed with GMO plants and make partial GMO offsprings. These 4 organizations, 1, 2, 3, 4, these have been designed by the CFIA to assess, recommend for accreditation, and monitor certification bodies. These are the certification bodies, and these 4 big guys, they just have to make sure these 8 little guys are doing a good job, and these 8 bodies can just certify organic products. The Government of Canada also states that these certification bodies do on-farm assessments and produce assessments, but it doesn't say what code they use and nor what the exact standards are. Okay, so you could buy 100% grass-fed beef. Yes, this is one good way to stay away from GMOs, because you know the cows that you're eating haven't been eating GMO corn or GMO soybeans. But it is hard to trace and guarantee that your hamburger ate non-pesticide grass and grass for its whole life. At this moment, GMOs do not have to be labeled, so you won't know if you're eating GMO foods, and you pretty much guaranteed are eating GMO foods. You can do some further research into nonprofit companies which label some GMO-free products, and then look for them in your grocery store. You can also try to shop local if you know that there are any trusted organic farms close to you, and then you could look for their produce in your grocery stores or at farmers markets where you can talk to the farmers firsthand. And the last suggestion is grow your own. This is a suggestion I would give you if you're looking to be GMO free, but it's still difficult because you have to find pesticide free soil, make sure the seeds haven't been genetically modified or they're hybrid seeds, and there's no guarantee that they aren't genetically modified, because there's no way of telling unless you have a lab